Hey everybody, this is Russ and Rose with Access, talking to the amazing Lawrence Gowan of Styx. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing very fine, Rustin, today. We've kicked off this tour in high style, and last night we played a sold-out show at the Greek Theater in Los Angeles, so we're really flying high at the moment. I'm just... I'm keeping the buzz going this morning.
Well, congratulations on the new album, The Mission, and thank you for making it.
Well, thank you for saying that, because we were happy to make it. We wanted to make a new record for a good number of years, as I'm sure people are aware. But the 100 to 120 shows that we do every year seem to be a detractor to making new music, or at least to committing it to record. We were making new music all along through that 14-year period, but we never really committed to that extra bit of time to making a new record, and finally we did it, and The Mission is the result.
And you guys sort of kept it secretive through this process, didn't you?
We did, intentionally, because, you know, the incentive for a band with the legacy of Styx to make new music is not that demanding, really. It's not. There's not a crunch from a big record company that's saying, "Oh, we need new material right away," or "You guys are going to be done." That's not the case here. You have a situation where there's an insatiable demand to see the band perform live around the world, and we've been meeting that demand over the last couple of decades, just about, that I've been in the group, you know. But then there comes a day, and when you suddenly come up with something that you say, "Look, if we don't put this on record, we're really going to regret it someday." And once we started down the road of making this album, The Mission, we decided, you know, when we get to the end of this, let's get to the end. If we don't like it, we don't have to put it out. We can just keep it to ourselves, and you know, we'll move on from there, and maybe it'll become part of something else down the road. But about a year ago, we realized that, you know, we believed in it, you know, very strongly, to the point where, you know, we were determined to see it through, and I'm so glad that we did, because the reaction has been really fantastic.
Absolutely. Now, how did you guys approach this record, knowing that radio would largely ignore it because classic stations won't play the new material and modern stations rarely play classic bands? The
crazy dilemma, isn't it? You know, we didn't think about it, quite frankly. We thought about the lifeblood of the band. We always put the band its own needs first and foremost, and right alongside with that, the fact that so many of the faithful who've been, you know, year in, year out, coming to so many shows, kept asking about new music, you know. In every interview I do a chunk of the interviews, invariably there was always that question about, are you guys ever going to do new music? And I was always careful to say, we have new music, we just haven't released it, you know. And it just came to the point where we thought, we have to release it, despite the, you know, it's damn the torpedoes, you know. If the people will hear the album eventually, if they don't hear it all over radio right away. But there are already a good number of brave stations out there that are playing it, despite the restrictions, let's call it that classic rock radio have. I mean, by its definition, in order to be classic, it has to have been around for a while. So I can understand their dilemma. At the same time, there are a few that are going, well, if we don't continue to support these classic rock bands, then, you know, we should really look at what we're doing here. So with all of that going on, we feel that we're in a good place in spite of the current situation.
And it's a fantastic album. It's quickly grown to be one of my favorites already. But The Mission...
it's great.
The Mission is a concept album, as I understand it, about sort of a mission to Mars. How did the whole idea come about and sort of manifest itself?
Well, Tommy, 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, he came in one day, as he would often does, and we all do, with new ideas. And he had this little, it was a quirky but extremely charming little song called Mission to Mars. And I liked it immediately, and, you know, I thought, yeah, let's work on that a bit, and you know, something we'll play in sound checks, etc. But I definitely liked it. And a couple of weeks later, Tommy, from his Shaw Blades world, he has a partner named Will Ivankovich, and Will is a really impressive musician and, you know, producer, and he had the beginning of a song called Locomotive. When we heard the two of them side to side, we realized these songs connect really nicely. And then Tommy and Will began kind of working on this idea of it being a story. Not terribly unlike the book The Martian, where, it's about a NASA mission to Mars. It's going to happen in the future, but this is a kind of a musical telling of that story. However, where I managed to wedge a little bit my own moment into it was after we were invited to NASA, and this is all concurrent and coincidental to us working on it. We were invited to NASA to witness the arrival of a spacecraft called the New Horizons, which is at the end of its 9-year voyage. So it left over 9 years ago, it left Earth, and had arrived at the planet Pluto. And on that voyage, they discovered that Pluto had not 4 but 5 moons orbiting it, and NASA decided to name that 5th moon Styx. So of course, that's part of how we got entree into being there on the day that it arrived, and they showed us pictures of the moon Styx, and I suggested to Tommy and Will at that point, why don't we continue the story on that when they leave Mars, instead of turning for Earth, they continue on, and we can make Styx whatever we want it to be. And so they put that into the story where they go to buy the moon Styx and replenish, because it's rich in all kinds of resources. And then they continue on into the Kuiper Belt, and the mission perhaps never turns around and comes back in this direction. Having said all of that, that is the little story that runs through it. But the songs themselves, and I hope you feel this way, they stand on their own. You can listen to the album devoid of the story entirely. As Tommy likes to say, there's no reading required in rock and roll. I like the fact that you can personalize the songs. So, for example, when I hear the song Radio Silence, or as I hear the album, the human interaction of the crew, to me, is very much akin to the interactions and human dramas that unfold within a band. That's just the way I hear it, because that's how I know life. And I think people will be able to personalize it to their own existence, and perhaps it'll fit into their life in their family life, or in school life, or in their relationship life. That there's a double entendre that to me runs through every single song, where you can relate to it on your own human level.
Yeah, it's very relatable outside of the concept, and that's one of the things I think that really enriches what the album is about. It's great that there's this concept and theme that you can follow along with a little bit linearly, but you can also just take it apart piece by piece, and it still sounds incredible. So
that's right. Yeah.
Now, there's 6 characters in the storyline, from what I understand. And you and Tommy and JY all sing on the album, as always. Did you each voice a given character on each track, or did you go with the voice that you felt best served each song?
Well, that's funny. That flip-flopped a few times throughout the making of the record. There are versions of songs where it wound up being Tommy singing lead that I sang lead on, or ones where I sang lead that he sang lead on. But we began to really sculpt it more to where his character was the pilot, JY's character was the all-important engineer who's going to, take his head out of the clouds, so to speak, and think about the practicality of what they're actually trying to accomplish, which, to my way of thinking, is entirely JY anyway. That's who he is. And then somehow my role became, as the first officer on this mission, I'm a little bit the voice of balance, I suppose, and reason to a degree of still supporting the dream of the pilot, so to speak, and his sometimes reckless nature that ultimately leads to good things. So that's the voice that ultimately tended to resonate with my own piece of the tapestry of the crew.
Now, there are a lot of classic Styx elements from the Grand Illusion and Pieces era, including a return to some degree to the band's more progressive roots on parts of, say, Equinox or even Crystal Ball. Yeah. Was that an intentional design, or just sort of how it played out as the songwriting progressed?
Really, more of the latter, quite honestly. It just became apparent that, we love what those records sounded like. I wasn't in the band at that point, but I was a huge Genesis and Yes and Jethro Tull fan, but those keyboard sounds, those approaches were part of Styx, And I love that sound. I love that analog nature of that. And so in my own corner, that's what I began to really champion. And Tommy and Will, they just suddenly were like, okay, no plugins. Let's crank up the amps and mic them and keep moving the mics around till we get what we want, and etc. And as the record progressed, more and more, we actually recorded the whole thing probably about 3 times. And the one that you finally hear on the album, there's nothing digital in it at all. It was recorded to tape. We'd polished the performance enough that we were ready to commit it to tape. Everything we used was as if all we used was what existed in 1979. And that's how you get that sound. That, and of course, how you orchestrate the songs and how they're arranged. And, Tommy started saying, I'm about as excited as, I don't remember this same excitement since Grand Illusion, just in himself personally, saying, because so much of the song, some of the tones and sounds were resonant with that period. And ultimately that's where it wound up. And so, already, what we've been hearing and what we've been feeling is that you can play this record alongside Grand Illusion, Pieces of 8, Cornerstone, Paradise Theater, and not feel like there's this gigantic leap of 30 years into the future, 40 years, just about to where the band concurrently resides.
No, it's definitely a modern feel for Styx, but it still resonates with that classic sound. And there were even some flavors of bands like, say, Yes and Pink Floyd and Kansas that, it's Styx, but you could sort of hear some of that stuff in it.
Well, that's another aspect of it. You could always hear that in their older records as well. I could hear, some of my favorite keyboard sounds that were used were very similar to what Rick Wakeman would use, but of course they were part of the way that the Styx records were arranged, and they're so well arranged, and they lock in so well all the parts, and I love those. But as you say, it simultaneously seems to have a modern feel and yet hearken strongly to the past, although it's a story about the future. So we're trying to cover all time zones here. I think that that's not unlike what happens at a Styx show. And I think I think that's where younger people that have gravitated toward the band. I'm speaking of people that are under 30 and weren't even born when some of the biggest records were made. They know this era of the band, and yet they're in love with all eras of the band. And so we've particularly so far satisfied that group. I was talking to someone yesterday who's 22 years old, and he became a Styx fan when Arch Allies came out. That's in 2000. So I find that amazing. And then, of course, he's embraced all decades. And here's a band that's 45 years old, double his age. And he's, he loves the entire thing. And that's ultimately what we really want for our audience, is that they love all eras and have a connection to everyone that's ever been in the band and as the band exists today.
You guys spent 2+ years working on this album. As you said, you recorded it like 3 different times. Was that due to touring, or because you wanted to spend that extra time to really develop the music and live with it for a bit?
Both. Really both. One is, first of all, we had in that period, there's well over probably 250 shows interspersed with all of this recording. So, it does give you time to pause, reflect, and consider what the next move is going to be. And that was pretty carefully crafted, and useful time, because especially in light of the fact that it's a concept record. I happen to instantly love concept records. I've no problem with them whatsoever, but a lot of people do. So the notion of Styx doing another concept record needed to be carefully considered, and a balance needed to be struck between the concept and the musical integrity of the record. And I think the extra time to consider those factors was well worth pursuing.
Absolutely. And Styx for years now has been just a touring juggernaut. It's always a bit scary and something of a risk for classic artists like Styx to play new material live. And it looks like you're currently playing Gone, Gone, Gone and Radio Silence on the new tour. How are fans responding to the new songs live?
Well, I am so happy to report after the first 4 shows of this tour that Radio Silence, well, Gone, Gone, Gone leads straight into Blue Collar Man. So they don't get it. And Gone, Gone, Gone is only 2 minutes long. So we walk on stage to the overture. That's our walk-on music. And then Gone, Gone, Gone goes into Blue Collar Man. So there's really no way to gauge, other than the fact that people are jumping up, from the moment we, start the first song, how that's going. But when they hear Radio Silence, the response has been equal to everything else that we play in the night. And that has seriously had our jaws open at the end of the shows that we've come off and gone. They reacted to Radio Silence the same way they reacted to Miss America or to Fooling Yourself. And I suppose that's because, the faithful, as I call them, who've probably got the record and listened to it like crazy in that first week, have really embraced the song, the tone of it, and we're actually playing it pretty well too. So maybe it's a confluence of those factors.
So which song on the Mission would you personally most like to add to the set at some point on this tour?
Locomotive would be high on my list for that. Oh, I also did play, last 2 nights, I slipped in about the first minute and a half of Key Dive, which is this piano piece that I had and was playing in Styx shows for a couple of years, leading into Pieces of 8, and it eventually became the name of the ship that they're on is called the Key Dive, and so I played the little piano figure, about a first minute and a half of it leading in. So they actually got another taste there of the record. So obviously I enjoy doing that, but God, it's hard because really any song, 100 Million Miles would be great to put in next. The Outpost, I think, would be really strong to put in next. Trouble at the Big Show is definitely a great JY moment. I could jump all over, quite honestly. I'd love to do The Greater Good because that's got a nice, big chorus to it and is, leads well into, what comes next. I don't know. Maybe I'll say forget all those and go with The Red Storm. Yeah, even in the course of this, of me even considering it, I'd change my mind 100 times. Luckily, we have a system of democracy within the band where it'll ultimately be decided by majority.
As the Mission is a concept album, I know it's early on, but is there any talk of performing the album in its entirety at some point for a special show, perhaps?
There is already talk of that. Funny enough, Tommy and I were just discussing it this morning, as a matter of fact, before I called you. Yeah, there does seem to be already, because we look now, let's take our heads out of 1979 and come back to 2017. We do look at social media and what people are kind of throwing at our website and everything, and they're saying they would love to hear the record performed beginning to end, and that is really both literally and figuratively music to our ears because we would like to do that. I think the greatest tour that we've done so far was in 2010 where we undertook the challenge of playing Grand Illusion and Pieces of 8 back to back. Those full albums in their entirety, but also in the running order that the songs appeared on the record. So it was tough to do Come Sail Away fourth in the night. It just seemed odd at first, but then it worked. And the end of the night was Aku Aku, which is one of the sweetest and softest pieces of music that Styx have ever put out, and yet it worked because the people, sank into those albums and their personal experience with them, and we did a DVD of it, and I'm really proud of it. I think something along those lines would be my, if I were to have a little wish list, I'd like to see a night where we do a classic album and the Mission back to back would be my hope.
Oh, I would certainly agree with that. Okay, so because this is such an overwhelming time for you guys, the album is fantastic, as we said. What are you, if you look at everything over the last few years, putting this together, it's out now, what are you most proud of with this record?
First and foremost, the fact that we did it, that we managed to do it and keep the band together. That's never an easy thing to do when you're making a record because you're bound to have conflicting ideas as to where things should go next. And sometimes you champion your cause and it goes away, and sometimes you champion your cause, and the next thing you know, you've got the army lined up behind you. So I'm happy that we, at this advanced stage of a career, that we had the wherewithal to see it through, and then to look at each other and kind of go, it's a really rewarding experience to make new music and to have done it together and to feel that everyone was well represented on this record and has several moments, to shine. I'd have to say this is my proudest moment as being a member of Styx for nearly 2 decades now and still feeling like the new guy.
Nice. Lawrence Gowan, thank you so much for taking some time to talk about the new record. It's fantastic. You guys have a wonderful tour. Be safe on the road. I'm hoping you get back to Boise again on this tour, and I'll let you get out of here.
Rustin, I'm looking forward to getting back to Boise. Great to talk to you.